Welcome to our webinar on building a China entry strategy through WeChat for financial services and insurance. We're going to go ahead and get started. And my name is Shiana, and I'm the marketing manager at ChatLabs. Today, we have 3 panelists who will be speaking on the topic, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. We will be recording this webinar and sharing the webinar replay in our follow-up email, as well as our social media channels, so make sure to follow us. And feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen at any time throughout this webinar, and we'll get to them at the end of our presentation. So without further ado, here's Blums, Sam, and Tom.
Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Blums Pineda. We'll do a quick round of introductions here, but I'm Blums. I'm a partner at Prophet, based in Hong Kong. I have been in region in Asia since 2003, but actually working in and around China since 2011 when WeChat was actually first founded and launched. So glad to be here and glad to be speaking about this really timely topic. Over to you, Sam, for a quick intro.
Hi everyone, I'm Sam Papadakis. I'm an associate partner at Prophet, also based out of Hong Kong with Blums. I'm really excited to be here to speak with you all today and share some of the learnings that we've had from a lot of our own work and experience in China and in the region. I started my career at Morgan Stanley longer ago than I'm willing to admit, but it's exciting to get to now be working in the industry based here in Asia and to share some of the learnings as we go. So looking forward to sharing more, and now over to Tom.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Glad to connect this morning. My name is Tom Kruger. I run VP of Strategy here at ChatLabs, normally based in Asia, where I sit in Shanghai. I've been there now for 6 years, first in Guangzhou, then moved to Shanghai. And at ChatLabs, I oversee most of our client services and client strategy. And then I also help many brands kind of launch these WeChat, platforms and strategies that we're going to talk about today. So really looking forward to today's session, and back to you, Blums.
Yep. Great. So yeah, so very excited to welcome everyone. A good afternoon to folks in Europe and that time zone. Good morning to the folks in the US. We're really excited about this collaboration that ChatLabs and Prophet have put together to pull our brains together around this important topic that I think is very timely and sort of very popular. We will cover 3 topics over the next maybe hour and a half that we have today, and we will actually then have some time to field your questions. The topics that we came up with, I guess after hearing from a lot of you about what you were curious about, are really 3 things. We will cover very quickly why WeChat's an important channel, especially for global brands that are looking to enter and expand into China specifically. And I'm gonna cover that over like a 20 or 30 minutes. Some of it will be maybe a re-review of what you already know about the market and why that's important. We will then, of course, jump with Sam covering what are really the critical success factors for any global entrants moving into China and really wanting to leverage WeChat very successfully to really localize marketing and take it to the next level. And finally, we will have Tom Kruger from ChatLabs really cover more of the specifics around setting up and running WeChat operations. So across these 3 topics, hopefully most of you will get an end-to-end view around what it takes to be successful in WeChat. We, of course, per the title of the webinar we have a lot of financial services and insurance type examples, but at the same time, we are sprinkling it with other things for those of you that may be in other industries that you will also find quite useful and insightful in terms of what you're looking for. So with that, let's jump into the first topic. Right? So in the first section, next slide, really the why. Why is this important? Why is it an important marketing channel? We wanted to cover this with really, from a customer point of view, the Chinese consumer that we're looking to target. Why is WeChat relevant? What is the source of this relevance? And we wanted to maybe share a couple of facts. So on the next slide, we talk about just in daily lives for Chinese, right? WeChat is arguably the most used app that they have. They spend a lot of time in it, as we will show shortly. And therefore, if it is something that is in their hands, in their consciousness, that really permeates what they're doing day to day, it's also the most effective tool for marketers to really reach out and engage and interact. But it can't just be in a sort of spammy sort of way. It's something that, as we will show, you have to be very thoughtful about and design with that human consumer in mind. You have to be thinking about how you add value. And in fact, over the past 9, 10 years that WeChat has been in existence, there's been a lot of trial and error, but also a lot of best practices come across in terms of how to most effectively use this new medium, especially in China. We want to share a little bit of that, right? So in most parts of the world, when we think about just the different mobile activities, right, that you maybe if you're dialing in from Europe or from the US or somewhere outside China, you will notice that on your phone, on the home screen that you have, right, you will be having multiple apps that are your go-tos for different aspects of what you're trying to do in your digital life. You will maybe have 3 or 4 or 5 most frequently used ones for messaging. WhatsApp, if you're in, Korea, you'll have Kakao, right? Maybe Line. In the US, WhatsApp, Viber, very popular. Skype also. But as you go from messaging to social to professional to shopping, there are multiple apps that really take most of your time and really have the most utility because you have maybe different networks, right? And different contexts that are on each of these things. And so you're very used to multitasking across these apps. However, in China, right, that is not the case. In China, one app is really a super app that checks the box on all of these functionalities. And that is WeChat, right? They have done over the last 9 years really a great job of moving from a messaging app like Weixin, which is what WeChat's Chinese name is Chinese for micro messaging. It came across as really a substitute or an alternative to expensive SMS. Those of us that even remember what it's like to send SMS messages and get charged for it. But when you look at that, right, I mean, they really wanted to go over the top of the telcos and the mobile companies in China and offer this message. And that's why it really took off. But I think they didn't stop with that micro messaging. They saw that, hey, we can be sticky on the messaging part. What other parts, what are the day parts of the Chinese consumer do we take over? And so, they really built out a lot of functionality that rivals all of these apps that you see on this page. All right. So from that standpoint, when you look at just the stats, it bears this out, right? WeChat isn't just an app. It's actually part and parcel of typical Chinese consumers' daily life, right? When you look at like the time they spend on the mobile internet, a lot of it is through the WeChat interface and the functionality that they have on WeChat. Maybe the others would be, Video and Yoku or Tudo or maybe shopping on Alibaba, but even that, like a lot of those things are getting cannibalized and eaten up by WeChat. So a quarter of the mobile internet time is spent on WeChat. When you look at just the number of monthly active users, you hear stats anywhere from 1.1 to 1.2, even 1.3 billion monthly active users, right? And that's a pretty huge number. Again, wide age range covering a lot of the Chinese population. In the major cities in China, you've got 93% penetration and coverage across those different inhabitants, right? And from that standpoint, when you look at that audience, which the first 4 stats signify, you can imagine that from the brands that are operating in China, they want to make sure that they are covering those. Like a lot of the interactions in that customer experience, they want to keep on WeChat. And therefore, there are 20 million official accounts that businesses and brands have registered to be able to reach out to these audiences. And that is driving, and there's a lot of content being put on those. And so 3 billion article page views that you're really generating across those different things. So I think when you look at those stats and you compare it to maybe something that we're more familiar with outside China, Facebook, yes, you could say, it's less than half of the monthly active users. There's a lot more globally across Facebook with 2.5 billion monthly active. But when you look at just the throughput in the use, again, I talked about a quarter of the time. Some say, as close to anywhere from an hour and a half to sometimes even 3 or 4 hours of time spent on that overall app and ecosystem per day. And they're churning out a lot of messages. This is like the go-to in terms of all communication. There's 45 billion messages. When you think about calls, video calls, voice notes, all of these add up versus, for example, just 8 billion on Facebook Messenger, right? When you think about, for example, the average time per day, you're seeing almost 50% more spent on WeChat by a Chinese consumer versus your average Facebook consumer. And when you look at, for example, payment transactions, again, a billion plus per day. So very, very sticky. Again, in most of the things that you would want someone to have using in your daily life, communication, as well as sort of micro payments and daily payments, WeChat really takes the cake, been designed for that. And that's why it's able to generate and produce like all of these different stats. And so taking a look at like the next one, WeChat has really expanded. Like there's been, if you've listened to any of the talks around just WeChat R&D and what their key sort of design imperative is, it's really around targeting, what hour or what minute in a typical Chinese consumer's life are they not on WeChat, and why is that? What can we do differently? What can we add in terms of functionality in order to take over that minute and switch that Chinese consumer from somewhere else, especially if they're on their phone or they're on a screen, but they're not on WeChat? What can we do to create an alternative and get people to try it, right? Stay within that super app ecosystem. And just because of that, you see it really permeate. For example, Prophet, when we launch like what we call digital safaris into China, where we bring a management team or a team of sort of product developers into China for the first time. What we will often do is load a phone with WeChat, load it with sort of WeChat Pay and the cash, so that give them the experience of going through everything in their day, from hailing a taxi to making a call to doing a chat about what's the itinerary of the trip, to actually ordering lunch and paying for things, to hailing a cab ride and doing some online shopping, to checking out the QR code and finding out more about the product they're looking at in Homa, to other things. Like overall, it's amazing what all of these functions can do within that WeChat super app. And it's something that WeChat and Tencent continue to work very hard at developing to make sure they remain sticky, they innovate, and they expand this into more and more realms. And so there are examples that we see here where it's really permeating and pervading daily life, right? Very often when you even just cross the border from Hong Kong, where we're based, to Shenzhen, or anywhere you go in China, you will have taxi cabs with QR codes everywhere. You will have even a wet market, right, where someone is willing to take cash using WeChat Pay. So everywhere you go, it's extremely pervasive. It's extremely sticky. You don't need a different POS. It's integrated into quick service restaurants like a McDonald's or a KFC, etc. It's really something that you've worked very hard to make part and parcel of like daily life in China, and it's showing it in terms of that stickiness and that loyalty. So I think when you look at, for example, on the next slide, again, expanding and really looking for what other things that before you would have to pop out of the WeChat app in order to do, now you can do it just on the app. Very much, again, the best practice of trying to get to daily habits, and even within the day, multiple habits within the day. So public transportation, micro payments, right? All of these different things you do multiple times. Can we own that on the WeChat app? Things like purchasing tickets to a movie, reserving seats. Can I do that on the WeChat app? Booking hotels and flights, everything from Marriott Bonvoy to what you have with for example, Fliggy or even Ctrip. Is it that app, or is there a mini app on WeChat with that very familiar interface that you can go to? And even, for example, and you'll see this in a slide later on, decisions around where you'll invest some of that functionality. Should I build a bespoke Android app in China, right, for my mobile banking app? Or should I try to push as much of that functionality as I can into the WeChat app? So again, that familiarity around that WeChat interface, that ability to share information that you have across your main WeChat app to some of the other things, so that you are known and recognized and have a personalized experience. All of those are advantages that WeChat is really leveraging on and is using to make things easier for for clients, and therefore the brands and companies are reciprocating by really doing a lot of the digital investment around a WeChat first type approach to attracting that customer, right? So when you look at what's happening in daily lives, again, very sticky things. I mean, obviously, it's so pervasive in China in terms of chat, but even where you have maybe network, whether they be professional networks or friends that are within China, you have very active groups. You have a lot of great functionality around what's shared, and so you can imagine the traffic and the activity and the loyalty is like through the roof, right? 45 billion daily messages, as we mentioned, sent on WeChat. At the same time, they're looking for ways to make that even more sticky. Am I able to share breaking news, headlines, right? Just different sources around that on WeChat? Am I able to have, for example, groups, professional groups, personal groups, even alumni clubs, a lot of like that group functionality that you would have reside elsewhere, you get on sort of WeChat. And it's great because it is not just communication, but also sort of content sharing and a microsite, if you will, right? Again, very powerful. But I think the other main thing is that they want to make it as seamless as, hey, maybe I've been on like a multi-message exchange for a while. Why don't I just like press on the call button and initiate a video call or a voice call over WeChat? Again, totally over the top, totally bypassing sort of mobile, but I'm able to take advantage of things like presence, right? And always on and that sort of thing. I'm able to take advantage of like group video calls, right? And even this very uniquely China behavior around voice notes, right? I mean, I remember when I was based in the US, still composing voicemails and sending those. It's alive and well again in sort of the WeChat world, where sometimes you will get messages from someone on the go, like 4 or 5 30-second messages, right? That is something they want to communicate. And again, it's just another richer way of doing communication, which is why you've got this 400 plus million audio and video calls per day on WeChat. And I think, beyond just the communication aspect, again, looking deeper into like that money transfer option. I mean, WeChat has gone a long way from when they launched with Chinese New Year, like how do I give virtual digital red packets, right? And really take that expanse and breadth of China to really bringing that closer, where I can send a red packet with the same, love and honor and wanting to celebrate someone through a digital red packet using WeChat Pay. But that just was such a great move to make it so sticky that people thought if it's that easy, it can be easy for other things, like paying someone, a friend of mine that picked up a coffee bill, or we're splitting up the tab on a gift for a friend that's going away, right? Here's sort of my share. Just very easy to request payment, initiate payment, send payment. And so from a peer-to-peer, very powerful, from an individual to a small business that wants to get set up, whether that's a small business coffee shop at the corner or a big brand like a Starbucks or a McDonald's, all very easy. And again, greasing the wheels in terms of e-commerce, anything on Taobao or Tmall, right? Again, from paying merchants, very powerful from a money transfer and a value transfer point of view. The other part is really, even when you think about its effect in the workplace. So in the West, typically, you will have a lot of things competing for that work communication space. Everything from Slack, right, to Teams, to maybe other proprietary things that different companies are trying. In WeChat, it's just so easy to move to WeChat Work, which provides some of the functionality that you would expect from a groupware, enterprise groupware type solution, but with the same ease of use, rich capability that WeChat has. And so I think especially this has been a big priority for WeChat, but with COVID-19 happening, it really has enabled WeChat Work to get tested, to get trialed, to get to that scale and use. And I think what we're hearing is that some really good points of traction, right, in terms of that. And so whether it's they're using WeChat for work anyway, 8 out of 10 users do, to where enterprises are beginning to look at how do we take that more into a secure environment with maybe a lot more teaming functionality that I can do with WeChat work. That I think is sort of the next big move for WeChat in terms of owning that enterprise workspace. How do I begin to manage some of the company admin? How I can begin to own, especially where I have Salesforce or maybe private bankers or insurance agents, like that part of understanding how they're talking to clients, but also how I may be controlling how we push out content and standardizing on that. And so we've seen WeChat work really grow in the marketplace in China over the last 5 months, grow fourfold, and that's I think really powerful, and we expect to see that continued growth over time, right? And so I think with that as sort of a backdrop, hopefully you'll be able to see that just WeChat in terms of all of the different functionality, why it's so sticky, why it's so popular, why it is therefore a medium that marketers really need to look into, brands really need to look into, anyone entering China and wanting to be successful really need to look into. And I think with that as a backdrop, I wanted to take a look at maybe financial services in particular. When you look at financial services, it's no surprise that just as a digital trailblazer, financial services tends to be always at the forefront, right? And when you think about moving into digital, trying to do certain things much more on the digital front, whether that's in outside China, in the West, or even within China, that's always been the case. But I think what WeChat has done was really create a channel that consumers in China are very comfortable with. And what a lot of the financial services marketers, but also product developers and customer experience innovators have done was take a look at how we can tailor what we're doing and offering in WeChat and design it for the job to be done that that consumer, financial services consumer, has in place. Whether that's generating awareness for a brand that I'm launching. Maybe it's a digital bank. Maybe it's a new sort of SME sort of credit thing. But awareness and consideration, introducing that brand and service, being able to share and educate based on content. But even, for example, taking advantage of some of the gaming and play things that have really dominated, mobile in China into much more edutainment, right? Education and entertainment mashed up, so that someone is maybe learning about financial services or personal investing through a bit of a more gamified portion, or even like a lucky draw, all the way to can I actually consummate the purchase of certain products, right? Or taking orders within the WeChat app, right? Can I then, after I consummate that, maybe refer this to friends and family, right? And really begin to help that bank build some reputation around this certain thing, to all the way to whether it's the what you call it the loyalty or the servicing side. How do I continue to build on that relationship management, be able to collect data about what that client is looking for, be able to even support some very basic inquiry and claims. Again, that customer, especially in China, doesn't want to go queuing at the bank or a branch, right? Or having to call into a call center. If there's things they can do over WeChat on a chat-based interface with some really clear, simple things that they'd love to do that, scheduling appointments, etc. So I think that's sort of one key thing that we've seen a lot of financial services players push into. What we've also seen is that when you look at just local financial services brands in China, whether that be, like the big banks like a BOC or an ICBC or an ABC, Agricultural Bank of China, or CCB, to even big insurance players like Ping An or China Life, right? Folks that are big players in like more of the private banking space, like Merchant Bank. Like these are all folks that are, of course, driven to invest in, innovate in, and succeed in WeChat. And like this great study by our partners ChatLabs really prove this out, where you look at a lot of activity, like really clear activity around more number of service accounts and subscription accounts, because they are looking to maybe tailor to different segments and audiences. You see a lot more investment in just mini programs in order to be fit for purpose to the job to be done that the client is trying to do. A lot of these may be even test and learn, where they've got an idea about how they can make things easier, better for the customer, and they want to try it out and see what they can learn about that in the market. By contrast, when we look at like Western firms, right, it has not been that easy, right, in terms of this. Like for example, I think in terms of Western banks that have grown up where maybe it's not a mobile first or a mobile screen first type environment, they're still trapped in trying to translate what's working in the West on the web or apps, right? Native apps that they're doing, and how they can translate that into like the Chinese market versus really starting from scratch with a WeChat first mentality and developing with that consumer and that journey and that ecosystem in mind. And so we're looking for the Western firms to really, in a way, catch up there, get more native insight, and really, drive it. And we're already seeing that in terms of some of the other moves as they move from maybe standalone apps to a better mix of mini programs, right? Balance against those standalone apps. So an example here, for example, just from a Chinese brand is maybe eFund is a great example around where they're able to really develop in a very native way for this interface, very simplified copy, great use of like that classic WeChat interface of interplaying images and just very simple text, but being the ability for that prospect or that customer to drill down and really get through like the latest educational content, but also make sure that with a couple of swipes they're able to get through the gist of it, right? So I think there's a lot of like product design and content tailoring that really fit for that. To all the part around being able to on their phone, in essence, like consummate fund selection, fund comparison, and then in a way pull the trigger around deciding on certain funds and moving their monies around, checking transactions, etc. To much more loyalty, where hey, a lot of the consumers in China really prefer like a chat-based interface and a chat-based way of UI of really dealing with issues or questions or things with reps, right? And so how do you really tailor that type of an experience first and build around that in terms of really getting sticky with the customer across that entire life cycle. By comparison, we're seeing also that I think a lot of Western firms, we have here TD Ameritrade as an example, and we'll have, I think Tom begin to talk about this a lot deeper later on. Really take lessons from what is working there and approach it with a much more native insight point of view. So everything from really embracing the role of the official account, being able to really use it as a way of engaging that target audience to follow the account, but also be able to have content, tone of voice tailored to what it is to be effective and impactful and cut through in terms of WeChat. How do we use that to generate awareness, consideration, and really accelerate through to acquisition online, but maybe even offline? The other part is really how do I get to the next level in terms of educating that investor, having mini programs that with a great UI, with great stickiness and great design, take all of that wealth of information and knowledge base that TD Ameritrade has and bring it down into a format that you can really connect with and retain and be useful to you as a consumer. And then all the way to really pushing the envelope in terms of like an online app, right? Or mini program where we're really looking to use that WeChat interface, right? And to really drive that experience around converting them, getting them to do, but also like tracking them on the funnel through the different steps so that we're able to crack that lead every step of the way. All the way to if they convert, like, do I have a chatbot that I'm continuing to sort of invest in that's got the right skills and smarts, right, in terms of NLP and AI to answer all of the frequently asked questions in that very sort of WeChat natural way, but also begin to track all those conversations so I can refer to it, right? And at the same time, have that jump to a live agent, right, when needed. And so I think from that standpoint, we're already seeing that, again, in financial services, even the Western banks are getting pulled into having to do it at this high level and this level of innovation, even on WeChat if they want to succeed. And that's, I think, something that is a lesson not only for financial services firms, but anyone wanting to do well and maximize the use of WeChat in China. Okay, so I think with that, what I've covered is really, what we have in terms of why WeChat, why it's sticky with consumers, and maybe some initial examples of what brands and companies are doing in the space, right, to be effective with that. I'm going to turn over now to Samantha Papadakis, to really talk about, in more detail, some of the success factors and some of the case studies of WeChat being used as a marketing tool. So over to you, Sam.
Great, thank you, Blums. So now I'm excited to share with you from our experiences, some of, as Blums mentioned, these success factors when using WeChat as a marketing tool. And I think this encompasses things broadly from just entering the China market to more specifically how brands can play effectively on the platform itself. So we've outlined here today 5 different success factors, and for each of them, we'll show you an example of a client that we've partnered with and some of the work that we've done to help them really think about how they not only enter the market, but enter WeChat effectively. So the first one, again, in a very customer-centric orientation, really orients around how do we understand our audiences effectively. And so here we'll talk a little bit more about how do we not only do more detailed segmentation, some of the heavier quantitative analysis to understand the Chinese consumer and their differences in terms of their behaviors and their wants and expectations, but then also how do we sort of program that quite tactically into the personas and the targeting that we leverage and can leverage with a lot of the specific WeChat functionality. The second has to do with localizing the brand. And I think this is a really common endeavor that a lot of our clients come to us to talk about is, what works in the West or what works in sort of the multinational corporations headquarter country or in other markets in Asia won't work necessarily in China. And so a lot of the effort, can start not even before you jump onto the WeChat platform. How do we localize the brand in a way that's going to be relevant, not only from the name, but the positioning and the key sort of selling points and differentiators that the brand plays up. The third that we see is quite commonly successful, particularly for international brands entering China, is leveraging differentiators around their heritage, right? And so particularly in financial services, where we understand that there's a high interest and willingness to sort of bank or engage with international brands, there are key differentiators. And so we'll talk about what some of those are, that a lot of the heritage from international experience can be highly leveraged. And then the last 2 here are more around how we actually communicate. And so the fourth is around sort of the bite size. And obviously, as Blums shared in his earlier slides, whereas in the West, we might have dozens of different apps or even web properties themselves where we can communicate in a diverse means of channels with diverse range of content. Within WeChat, we're thinking very much so within obviously mobile first, but then an environment within an environment. And so when especially all of this content is competing with brands, with personal, professional, it's important to be incredibly mindful of the content strategy and not just simply plucking content that's leveraged and translating it, but really rethinking, from the look, the feel, the infographics, the design, as well as the messaging, how to really right size the content. And then the final is, leveraging the power of digital and of automation, of AI, of machine learning, and things such as Blums mentioned before with the TD Ameritrade example of the chatbots, but giving it a human face. And we see quite commonly in Asia, but especially in China, a heavy use of avatars, whether those are more animal or mascot characters or human sort of design characters themselves, to give it really more of that personal human touch. So the first one around understand your audiences, again, this can start from before you even enter the market, really thinking about, broadly speaking, a segmentation that's specific to the China market. And then it can manifest all the way down to taking those segments or those target profiles and really programming within the WeChat ecosystem from a advertising and targeting perspective, the specific personas, and then really being able to use tools to customize the different messaging chains or journeys that can be messaged to these different target audiences. And so the example here is a brokerage firm that the ChatLabs team actually worked with, and helping them identify some of these key 6 personas. And so very similarly, in a lot of the work that we do, we'll do a segmentation or persona development work to identify anywhere from 3 to 6 sort of key top priority personas. And then what we're able to do is program those into WeChat from an advertising and targeting perspective. And then once someone, for example, joins or subscribes to your official account, begins a dialogue, then we can actually program different messaging logic with different preloaded messages, content, visuals, etc., for each of these. And so it might be very similar to what you might be familiar with, for example, email or traditional CRM. All of this can be programmed directly into the WeChat interface. And so, for example, here for first-time traders, we've really built a very specific flow versus as compared to, one-time traders or aggressive traders. On the second best practice around localizing the brand, I think this is one of the most important things. Once you understand your audiences and you understand what they want, what they're looking for, and what they expect, not only from your brand, but from the category, how do you then refine everything from the positioning and the messaging of the brand, even the name as well, because localized Chinese naming is a huge part of entering the Chinese market effectively. And here's an example of, we worked with one of our clients, Pictet, which is a Swiss private bank, on how they start to prepare for greater China expansion. And so they've had a strong presence in Asia for 30, 40 years. It's a 215-year-old organization. And as they started to think about, acquiring a Chinese banking license and moving into China, doing the prep work around localizing the brand, building out a China web property, and then over time, as they move into WeChat, how do they leverage the learnings from the initial web properties and what worked in terms of the messaging, what resonated, where people clicked, and then leveraging that as they move into the WeChat platform. So again, even before one potentially moves into WeChat, to move into the actual communications and the execution, these first 2 areas are really important steps as precursors to that. When it comes to differentiators, what we find is that particularly for international brands in financial services, a lot of the the heritage around how old the brands are, how storied they are, the markets they've served is highly valued. And so we've done quite a lot of research for a number of different financial service and insurance brands over the past 5 to 7 years in China. And one of the key differentiators that we consistently see for international brands is really playing up that depth of experience, not just in product and service offerings, but also more importantly in terms of just how long they've been at this work. And the sort of using things like the dates, for example, are really common key selling points in a lot of the messaging and differentiating, particularly when trying to create points of differentiation against more local players. The idea once you're in WeChat is that obviously to right size the content. And one of the key things that we work with a lot of our clients on is content strategy, and helping them think through how they might take and adapt a content strategy either from global, other regions, or elsewhere within the APAC region. And how do you really localize that for WeChat? And so MetLife is an example of a client that we work closely with. And in this situation, what we did was an audit of the various WeChat properties. And again, one of the things that we very commonly see is that many brands will have several accounts, many programs, and there will be quite a proliferation of content on WeChat. And so not only, with MetLife in this instance, did we help sort of look at the variety of content across all the different accounts, but specifically, once we've established the localization of the positioning, how do we ensure that those key messages are coming through and that the right content strategy is delivering on those key messages? And then as you can see here as well, highly visual content to ensure that in a feed where you're not only competing with friends and family, but other brands, you're able to really differentiate and stand out and have a lot of clarity and simplicity with the visual content. And last but not least is this idea of really trying to humanize the brand. And so within WeChat, obviously the communications and the chat functionality, the chat bots are quite common. And one of the things that we see just in general with branding, but particularly in the messaging sphere, is the idea of using avatars to really put a face to a name or to humanize the brand. And this is an example of work that we did with AXA, where we developed Emma, who is sort of the go-to wellness navigator for AXA, and really in the spirit of trying to humanize the brand across the region. And what's interesting about this example is that Emma was created regionally to create a consistency and really make Emma well known all across Asia. But when it came to localizing this for China, unlike in Hong Kong, where Emma exists as a standalone app, in China, Emma was built obviously within the WeChat ecosystem. And I think what's really interesting here is that there was a lot of discussion and great debate when taking Emma from a Hong Kong launch into China around just exactly what would Emma look like in terms of, within the official accounts. And again, similar to the MetLife example, AXA obviously has many lines of business and so many different official accounts within some of the chat functionality, and then obviously within the content strategy itself. And so there's even considerations around the naming that are still being worked through. And Emma launched last year in Hong Kong, and I believe it's next Tuesday will actually launch finally after about a year's worth of localization efforts by the China team. And so this is another great example where even when within the region, you build more sort of regionally relevant avatars or faces to the brand, there's still a lot of localization and thought and consideration that goes into how do we then localize that experience, one, within the WeChat ecosystem so that it feels native, but two, everything from the name itself, the content, and the different lines of business and how that avatar can be a unifying force, even if you might have many official accounts, many programs. How can something like Emma's face, for example, be a red thread throughout? And so really integrating all of that and thinking through the implications across the entire WeChat ecosystem was the work that the AXA China team did after bringing and seeing the launch of Emma in Hong Kong. So with that, we've shared a number of different success factors from higher level pre-WeChat entry around segmentation and brand positioning localization to more WeChat specific execution and activation around the content strategy and how brands can really move to humanize the brand, not only through more communication based engagement as opposed to, let's say, web or email based, but then also using really creative assets, whether that be mascots or actual human avatars, to really bring the brand to life. So we can take more questions on that during the Q&A section. But with that, I will turn it over to Tom, who will speak now about the how and ChatLabs' expertise really in activating a lot of the WeChat ecosystem and the capabilities required.
Great, thanks, Sam. So, as we move on, I think it's pretty clear so far that WeChat has loads of possibilities, and really what you as a brand, what you as a company are able to tap into is very extensive, and everything from the payments to customer service chats to branding and advertising. WeChat really is that super app. And I think it can feel daunting as you grow your ecosystem of how do I implement this? If I haven't started yet, where can I start? Am I too late to the game? And I think what we wanted to kind of close on today is really, as a brand, where should you be thinking to invest your time and resources? Where should you be starting out? Where do you really point your teams to in terms of really getting up to speed with WeChat? And so, with that, I wanted to start with a question that I get from a lot of brands as we help them build these WeChat strategies. And the question that I get is, WeChat is a super app, but what we've seen in China, especially over the past 4 or 5 years, is that China is an ecosystem of many super apps. You have Douyin, TikTok, you have Tmall now, you have Meituan, Didi, Baidu. It seems like every year there's a new up and coming super app that has all the same functionalities of WeChat, or a lot of the same, but many new and innovative features as well. And it can feel daunting. Should you still invest in WeChat today in 2020 when there are such a great ecosystem of other apps as well? And what I try to recommend when we get this question is really, you need to remember where WeChat shines. As Blum said, WeChat really grew out of this time of cost and convenience. Really what there was before WeChat was some messenger apps, but not a lot. And because of that, SMS was still kind of the go-to method for communication. But like Blum said, SMS was cost very, you had to pay a fee for each SMS that you sent. It wasn't very effective as it kind of depended on the phone device you had. But really where WeChat really stepped up and really added that feature set was that there was free Wi-Fi everywhere, and if as long as you connect to Wi-Fi, you can have one standard messaging for all your friends and family that you talk to. And really, even though WeChat has grown to include the social, the professional features, the money features, the shopping features, even things like mini programs, where WeChat still shines today is in that messaging element, in that text messaging, in that voice call, in that video call. That's really what makes WeChat at its core really the most effective app, and really the most I'd say famous app in China for consumers. And because of that, when we recommend your starting point on WeChat, we need to think about, as a brand, what should your presence look like? And WeChat's interesting. When you think about other social media platforms outside of China, your brand is more of a fan page. It's more of something that you like. It's something that you subscribe to, almost like an email subscription, and you get content from the brand pushed to you. But the interesting thing that we see in WeChat is that WeChat, if you look at my home screen here, this is a home screen on a typical day in China. This is my home screen where I have my wife at the top, and I chat with my wife, and I have her messages there. At the next chat, you'll see I have some work chats where I chat in group chats with friends and families and colleagues there. And then at the very bottom, you can even see my mom, who I chat with on WeChat as well. But nestled within all of those different chat messages, you'll see a brand. And really where WeChat shines for a company is that on WeChat, you're not just a fan page. You're not just a subscription to an email. As a brand, you are alongside that person's friends and family. And because of that, what WeChat gives brands and companies the ability to do is really be a friend in that ecosystem. And so as you build, you need to remember that your brand needs to be brand as a friend, that you're not just that subscription box, you're not that fan page, but you are that friend of that consumer. That's really important as we see WeChat really evolve. That's still very much at the core of the platform and really of the ecosystem. And so with that, there's a few key things that we need to be thinking about. In terms of where do you start, really what our recommendation is to start on WeChat is through what's called a WeChat service account. And the WeChat service account is on that homepage, like I said. So your relationship, your friendship is on that homepage through a service account, but you have access to other core features as well. So you have customer service chats where you can have a chat bot, or you can have live agent chat where your team can respond to customer inquiries as they come through. You have the ability to link to other content. So if you want to link to an iOS app, if you want to link to a mini program, if you want to link to a website, you can do that through the service account very easily. And then another core feature is you also have the ability to support different content marketing features. So you can post content on a weekly basis to all of your followers and really keep them up to date with what's going on in your business. But when you think about all the features, really the best place to start is that WeChat service account. Now, as you expand, there's some other things that you should be thinking about as well. So one is going to be that content marketing aspect that we just discussed in the service account, but there's other platforms and other ecosystem features that WeChat offers. One is a feature through WeChat Work for business chat. So in financial service, you can have your relationship managers or your financial planners actually use WeChat Work as a way to chat one-on-one with your client base or your leads, but also you can create different group chats. So if you wanted to chat with, a group of investors or a group of your sales team, or also maybe even a family group chat where you're actually interacting with several different members within a family, that WeChat Work really offers that business chat capability. That's really core. Now, another area that you can expand into within the WeChat ecosystem is mini programs. And I'm sure you know a lot about mini programs by now, but what mini programs offer you to do is really localize what would be a standalone iOS or Android app globally. You can localize that into the WeChat ecosystem so that it's native to the WeChat ecosystem, but also tap into some of the API features. One of the things that a mini program offers as you go through your registration process for a new client, mini programs have a one-click SSO feature where you can actually allow the user with just one click of a button to submit their first name, last name, their home address, and even collect their phone number as well. And so that's really powerful as you think about the customer experience, as you think about barriers to entry for maybe an account application or some sort of sign up page. Really, WeChat offers you that next step to really streamline that process, not just for the brand, but also really for the consumer. And so things like mini programs are really valuable and important in that ecosystem. Now, in terms of how should you think about building the ecosystem, there's really three key areas that we want to recommend. When you think about the framework that you're going to put in place, when you think about the foundation that you want to build in WeChat, really where you want to start are these three areas. And the first is identify and acquire. What that means is that you need to think about how can you not only grow your follower base, but how can you really identify who those followers are. It's not that important anymore just to have millions upon millions of followers. What's really valuable in WeChat now is knowing who those followers are and maybe linking them back to actual customer and lead profiles that you have. The second is really how do you enrich and engage that relationship? Like we talked about, that friendship is really important, but how do you maintain that relationship? What content are you publishing? What service features and functionalities are you providing to the consumer so that they can engage with your brand? And then lastly, over time, we don't want to lose that subscription. We don't want to lose that follower to your official account. We don't want to lose that friendship. So what are you doing to both improve that relationship and then also retain them as a follower and as a customer of your brand? Now, one of the most common questions I also get is, as a brand, I have lots of people that should be involved, but really, what do you recommend in terms of a team structure or team competencies when it comes to really implementing the strategy? And for us, it's pretty simple. I think when it comes down to it, the teams that you should be thinking about really bringing together and really synchronizing in order to make that WeChat a valuable ecosystem is first going to be your CRM team. So bringing your CRM team in, allowing them to work and really connect that data into WeChat. The second is going to be making sure that your marketing team is synced up. So from a content marketing perspective, from that kind of weekly message that you're sending out, or even things like customer service, really important that you have your marketing team. And then lastly, in terms of building out those services and functionalities, really think about bringing your product marketing team in and your product management team in so that they can better build out those capabilities that you have globally, but really localize that into WeChat. And this is really the harmony that we see work well for a lot of big financial institutions and banks that we work with, but also other brands as well, as having these three core teams involved. Now, in terms of where should you be connecting and really the keys here, the first that we talked about is really that identify and acquire. Now, in terms of what you should be doing, the first key is going to be connect your data. WeChat offers so much data and insights that you as a brand have access to. But if you're not connecting into it, if you're not bringing that data into a place where you have access to it and then can create decisions and marketing feeds from, it's really not valuable. And if we look here at this chart I have, when you look at the WeChat ecosystem, there's so many different touch points that you can connect into. And you might not know this, but WeChat actually allows you to map and identify one single profile across all of these different touch points. So for example, if you have someone who follows your WeChat service account, but you also use WeChat Work to chat in those group chats or those one-on-one chats for your relationship manager, well, you can actually identify that same contact with what's called a union ID. So I can have one profile and across all of the touch points, whether a mini program, an HTML5 site, WeChat Work, or even WeChat Pay, I know exactly what that consumer is doing across all of my brand touch points. And what that allows you to do is that allows you to understand really their engagement circle of what they're doing on WeChat. But something that we really want to recommend is you want to take those engagement histories, you want to take that activity, you want to take that insights, and you don't want to just leave it in WeChat, but think about bringing it to your CRM. And that's really key in terms of being able to deploy some of the more fun and engaging marketing experiences once you have that data bound to CRM, where you can say, okay, this WeChat follower is this CRM contact, or this WeChat follower is this lead that I have in my instance, and I know exactly who they are, and now I can program different marketing efforts to really bring them to the next stage in the life cycle. And this as the foundation is really key and really important. Now, as you move on, once you've connected your data, you need to think about how do you build an enriched follower profile. I mentioned earlier that, in 2020, it's really not enough anymore to have, a ton of followers. Just having followers isn't going to make your WeChat strategy successful, nor is it really going to meet the KPIs that need to drive revenue and business for your company. But really what we see as kind of important KPI today, really the most important KPI is of your follower base, how many of those have an enriched profile? How many of those followers have you identified? And the example here is, when we look at kind of core profile personas, when someone follows your WeChat account, they're very much anonymous. We have about 6 or 7 attributes that we can automatically collect, but really nothing to identify who they are and what they want from our company. But as you go about it, you need to think about, how can I bring that anonymous follower into somebody that I'm tracking, engaging with, and seeing what their preferences are. And then from that enriched profile, how can I bring that, like we mentioned earlier, into that CRM circle so I know exactly who that person is within the context of my business. And so really a key KPI that you should be thinking about is not just total followers, but how many of those followers that you have in WeChat have you identified to your CRM? And that's a very important KPI. And lastly, as we talk about kind of expanding onto the WeChat ecosystem, you need to think about, and this is really for your product management team, but think about bringing in services to that WeChat ecosystem. A good place to start is look at what you're doing for the consumer. Maybe you have a website where they can create an account. Maybe you have a iOS app or an Android app that allows them to view a webinar. And those are great experiences. But for China, the best way to think about it is, how can I take that online application? How can I take that webinar? How can I take that white paper website that I have for different content? How can I take that and localize it and bring it into WeChat? And one of the best ways to do that is through things like mini programs, where you can actually integrate that account application process directly into a mini program. And at every step of that funnel, really bringing those services from an outside WeChat ecosystem, really localizing those into WeChat and bringing those into the system itself. And that's really our third key there, and really important. And what we wanted to end with today as we close out, and what I want to leave you with, is think about the long term. And once you have those first 3 key elements embedded and built into your WeChat ecosystem, think about, here's an example of business value to effort. And these are some different experiences and portals and different offerings that you can think about deploying. But think about these as you expand, and think about maybe launching some of these elements into your WeChat strategy. So thanks for the time. With that, I'm going to hand back to Shiana as we close out now with some Q&A.
Thank you, Tom. So now we're going to get started with our Q&A session. I see there are quite a few questions here, so don't worry if we don't have enough time to address all of them. Feel free to reach out to us afterwards and we'll be happy to answer them. Let me see, what's a good question to get started with? Okay, how about this one? What is a common mistake you see firms make trying to enter the China market? Blums, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, I think the most common thing we see is that, especially from global brands entering China and then thinking about WeChat, is that they think, like, how hard can it be? This is just like WhatsApp or whatever, or Viber or whatever they're very familiar with. And it's not, right? Because again, from the context of just how central WeChat is in folks' lives, how pervasive it is, even little things like what Tom pointed out around, you can have brand messages show up like right in the middle of friends and family, in like that circle of trust that you have. And so I think with that comes a lot of really paying attention to best practices that's going to work in that front. And really, I think paying attention to firms like ChatLabs and Prophet that really know this space, have been successful in this space, and really learning from that. It's not, I mean, experimentation is great, but I think you can waste a lot of cycles and make a lot of missteps if you approach it with just sort of too much freedom. There's just some basic things, and I think whoever asked that question attending this webinar is one great insight. There's a lot of content you can have. You've now got some great resources that you can reach out to in order to be more advanced in how you're thinking about approaching and making that first step into the market.
Awesome, thank you, Blums. Okay, I see another one says, how long would a complete digital transformation take? For example, how long did TDA's mini programs take to build? Tom, can you please enter this one?
Yeah, happy to. So when I look at, building WeChat ecosystems, I think it's really going to depend on the complexity of your business. Now, I think typically you want to start with an early MVP and really go from there. So what we recommend is think about, how can you launch a touch point in WeChat in under 3 months? The TDA example that we gave, That's about 4 to 5 months of effort as we built out different chatbot experiences, as we integrated different account application processes. And really what we find with financial service, it's not just the build of the platform, but it's also the compliance and legal aspect where you need to go through that compliance effort. You need to get the approvals from your different internal teams as well. And a lot of times with this industry, that can take some time. But typically we recommend thinking about the short term, thinking about how and what can I launch within 3 months.
Awesome. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Okay, let's see. One person asked, I know a lot of Chinese firms have multiple accounts and multiple mini programs to deliver different content or services to different target audiences. Would you recommend this strategy? Sam, can you take this one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very common, and we see amongst many of our clients that there are many accounts and certainly many mini programs. I think that's absolutely okay. And as we mentioned earlier, WeChat is an ecosystem in and of itself, right? So just as a brand might have multiple websites, multiple microsites and apps, that's appropriate. I think when we think about accounts, we try to take into account several factors. And I think the primary one is just how do you ultimately come across to that customer, right? And if the accounts have different purposes for valid reasons, and a customer is going to want to engage with those different accounts to see different types of content, that might be appropriate. In other instances, there are opportunities, particularly given some of what the service account versus subscription accounts allow you to do, there are opportunities to consolidate a lot of that functionality. As for mini programs, absolutely okay to have multiple. I think these have, some are more evergreen ongoing, some have a very, short shelf life. And I think it all comes down to, similar with the accounts, what's the discrete purpose that that customer is going to get or how they're going to interact. And if there are redundancies in terms of the functionality or the way a customer interacts, then that's when we really look to consolidate. Otherwise, it's and very similar to what you might do in a traditional digital strategy outside of China, where you have your web, your social, your email, and so forth. We would very much so approach it from a holistic perspective when auditing the channels and their different purposes, or auditing the accounts and mini programs.
Great, thank you, Sam. So for the last question, this is a very common question that financial services have. Does your platform adhere to cross-border data security requirements? I'm assuming this is referring to ChatLabs. Tom, would you like to take this?
Yeah, happy to. So in terms of Chinese security and really data privacy, I think it comes down to, are you localizing to the needs of China and really making sure that your ecosystem is within the confines of China? For all the ecosystems that we build, we always want to, really emphasize and really build out those, platforms and those capabilities within the China region and really within mainland China's, server infrastructure. And that's something we can always take other questions on, but always top of mind as we build out the platform.
Great. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And feel free to reach out to Blums or Sam from Prophet and Tom or myself from ChatLabs if you have any questions or would like to discuss more. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.